Greetings and salutations and welcome to Lost in Video. Now in this video we're going to take a small break from retrospectives and instead take a look at a list that I made of my top 23 movies that I watched in the year 2023. Now this isn't going to be a strict ranking or a list of the year's best releases. Instead it's just a collection of movies that I watched over the past year that I really loved. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. Number 23, The Loveless. When I stumbled across this 1981 drama, I decided I had to give it a watch for two main reasons. First of all, it was the debut feature film of now iconic director Kathryn Bigelow, though it was also co-directed with Monty Montgomery. The second reason is because this was also the first credited role in a feature film for the Green Goblin himself, Willem Dafoe. The plot is pretty basic, and the title is accurate enough. It's the late 50s, and some bikers roll into a boring small town on a main highway with the intention of just passing through, and trouble ensues due in part to the presence of the bikers. It's not an amazing movie by any stretch of the imagination, and I'd probably only recommend it to hardcore fans of Kathryn Bigelow and Willem Dafoe. However, it did leave a strong impression on me, which is how it found its way onto this list. Number 22, Beau is Afraid. The first entry on the list from 2023, Beau is Afraid was definitely not my favorite movie of the year. Ever since seeing Hereditary in theaters, I've kept my eye on director Ari Aster like many others, and so it should go without saying that if you're familiar with his work thus far, you'd be silly to expect anything pleasant here. This man likes to make disturbing movies, that's all there is to it, although so far he always seems to operate at a very high quality level as well. Beau is Afraid is no different, and I really don't know how to describe the plot other than to say it's a panic-riddled man's worst nightmares manifesting themselves throughout a journey through, well, I don't even know quite what. Beau is Afraid was not an enjoyable movie experience exactly, and it's pretty long too, but it did strike me as very creative and something I'd never quite seen before. For whatever that's worth, it secured Beau's place at number 22. Number 21, Crazy Joe. Remember the cranky, humorous old grandpa from Everybody Loves Raymond? Well, before he was busting his son's chops and arguing with his wife over cheesecake, Peter Boyle was mowing down gangsters with machine guns in Crazy Joe. This 1974 crime film was based on the life of a real New York gangster, Crazy Joe Gallo. I don't know anything about the real man, so I can't speak to the film's accuracy. I will say this movie was pretty fun to me, as Peter Boyle's at times over-the-top performance carries the movie and gives it its appeal. It's basically Peter Boyle being an absolute maniac for a little more than an hour and a half. It's not The Godfather or Goodfellas, which makes it a little tricky to recommend for a gangster movie. Personally, I love Crazy Joe, and I consider it a solid entry on this list. Number 20, Old Dads. We're going to stick back in 2023 for these next three entries, starting with what I believe is the feature film directorial debut of my favorite living stand-up comedian, Bill Burr. Old Dads was released on Netflix, and I have to say I went into this one with pretty low expectations. That would be because I'd actually gone to theaters to see stand-up comedian Sebastian Maniscalco's About My Father. I'm a big fan of Sebastian, and I'm sure the movie was well intended, but I hated it. Old Dads was just the opposite. It's a perfect fun by-the-numbers comedy. It's nothing special, and it didn't need a theatrical release. It was perfect right on Netflix. The movie is about three best friends who become husbands and fathers and struggle with some of the challenges that come with changing times and getting a little bit older. I had fun, and while it's not a super memorable movie, it was funny, a solid comedy, and I'd recommend the movie to general audiences. Number 19, Scream 6. Next, we have the sixth installment in the Scream franchise, and there's honestly not going to be a ton for me to talk about here. Listen, all I can say is that if you're going to continue to make these Scream movies, at least make them entertaining, and that's exactly what directors Tyler Gillette and Matt Bettinelli-Olpin accomplished here. The movie doesn't take itself too seriously, which is something that I can greatly appreciate, because there's certainly no way I could take 6 Scream movies seriously. I will say, at the film's climax, there's a couple of moments that brought me to tears of laughter, and I'm still unsure whether or not it was intentional. That being said, Scream 6 was an entertaining movie, and one of the more fun movies that I saw in 2023. Number 18, Knock at the Cabin. Another 2023 entry, Knock at the Cabin, is another attempt by M. Night Shyamalan to perhaps right some wrongs of the past when it comes to the hit or miss quality of his films. Knock at the Cabin, in my opinion, isn't exactly a home run, but it's at the very least a base hit. It's far from his worst, but it's definitely not as good as some of his past movies either. For me, the best part is Dave Bautista, who shows once again what a versatile and depthful actor he can be. The rest of the cast is pretty good too though, and while the entire movie as a whole is a little wishy-washy to me due to a little thing here and a little something there, it manages to be captivating the whole way through, and it did a good job of holding my attention. Even though I'm not in love with the movie, it ranks higher than Scream 6 just barely due to Dave Bautista's performance. Number 17. Angels in the Outfield. So, I've seen Angels in the Outfield before, but this was my first time watching this 1994 family movie as an adult. Much like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, this was also my first time watching this movie on a format other than VHS, and I really didn't know if it was gonna hold up, because I had such fond memories of it from my childhood. Well, once again, just like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Angels in the Outfield definitely holds up as a great family movie in my opinion. It was crazy watching Joseph Gordon-Levitt as our young protagonist, having seen so many of the movies he's made in his adult life now. That guy was just always talented. Danny Glover is wonderful too, and it goes without saying that Christopher Lloyd brings a lot of fun into the equation. All in all, this was a pleasant trip down memory lane, so it had to be included on this year's list. Number 16. Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Back to the 1970s we go now, with this action comedy from 1974 starring the man with no name himself, Clint Eastwood, and Jeff Bridges, or Al Deuterino if you're not into the whole brevity thing. This is another pretty basic movie where a career criminal played by Clint Eastwood takes on a young protege in Jeff Bridges, as the two attempt to pull off a heist together with a couple old acquaintances. It's a fun movie, although I will say the ending really caught me off guard and sort of changed the entire tone of the film retrospectively. Eastwood and Bridges are both great, as you would expect, and so I would recommend this to anybody who doesn't mind watching 70s movies. Number 15. Rear Window. Like Angels in the Outfield, I'd seen this 1954 Alfred Hitchcock classic before, but it had been a very long time, and I'd only seen it once. That being said, it was definitely a treat to go back and watch this one again. The whole thing takes place in one guy's apartment, and he's in a wheelchair for the whole movie, so how can that not be incredibly boring, you ask? Well, he begins to suspect that his neighbor has murdered his wife as he begins to watch him from the other side of his apartment complex with binoculars, and a suspenseful game of cat and mouse begins between the two. It's a classic for a reason, which is why it's also been remade and ripped off so many times since its 1954 release. Hitchcock was a pioneer in suspense for a reason, and this movie's influence on cinema as a whole is a good enough reason for its inclusion on this list. I should note that this would be listed up higher if I'd never seen it before, but I have, and I was pretty confident that I'd enjoy it again. Number 14. Spider-Man: Across the Spiderverse. In 2018, Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse was released and took everyone by storm with its captivating storytelling and spellbinding animation. A lot of people said it was the best superhero movie that came out that year, and all I'd say is it would certainly have been in my top 3. In 2023, the sequel, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, came out, and it did not let fans of the first movie down. I would compare this movie to the video games Arkham Asylum and Arkham City to describe my feelings. Arkham City was a bigger and better version of Arkham Asylum, and virtually perfect, but Asylum was still a little more special to me because I wasn't sure what to expect yet. I love Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. It's a bigger version of something we've already seen, and while it may not have the same magical effect of surprising me in the way that the first movie did, it's still an entertaining and worthwhile sequel. I look forward to more. Number 13. Best in Show. This little indie comedy from the year 2000 was an unexpected blast. It's very simple, so there won't be a lot to talk about here, but it's an independent comedy directed by, written by, and starring Christopher Guest, also co-written by and starring Eugene Levy, as well as featuring Fred Willard, Catherine O'Hara, and Parker Posey, who is much funnier in this than she was in Beau is Afraid. It's a mockumentary about a dog show, as well as all of its contestants and their owners. If you're a fan of mockumentary-style comedies such as The Office or Parks and Recreation, and you happen to be a dog lover, then this movie should be a slam dunk for you. Number 12. Swimming with Sharks. This one is another independent film, this time from the year 1994. It's a dark comedy about how evil, slimy, crooked, corrupt, and treacherous the world of Hollywood is, and it stars Kevin Spacey, so that's ironic. Frank Whaley, who you might know as Brad from Pulp Fiction, plays Guy, a new assistant for a highly successful but abusive and slimy Hollywood executive played by Spacey. The abusive relationship between the two is meant to be darkly humorous, and it is, with plenty of cringeworthy and at times hard to watch moments. The movie takes a non-linear approach to some of its storytelling, which adds a little flair to what could have been presented as a very boring movie. It's both an amusing and haunting dark comedy, and I love those. Since I figure it's not very likely that I'd ever do a full retrospective on this one, I figured I might as well include it on this list. If you're enjoying this content, please give this video a like, share it with your movie-loving friends, and subscribe to my channel. Also, let me know down in the comments, what were some of the best movies that you watched in 2023? I'd love to hear them. Now, back to the list. Number 11. Chinatown. We go back to the classics for this one, and wouldn't you know it, it's the second movie on this list from the year 1974. Yes, directed by the talented creep Roman Polanski, I had to include this classic Jack Nicholson film noir to my list. I've seen this one once before as well, and I remembered liking it, but as years went by and I never revisited it, I began to forget about certain details. Therefore, a rewatch was necessary, and I'm glad I did it. This detective mystery follows private investigator J.J. Gitz as he's hired by one person after another, each step he takes dragging him closer into a web of conspiracy, kidnapping, lies, corruption, and murder. I highly recommend this to people who enjoy a good detective mystery. It's definitely a classic. Number 10. In the Heat of the Night. For this one, we go a little bit further back to the year 1967 with this classic starring Sidney Poitier and Rod Steiger. It's another crime mystery with a different twist than that of Chinatown. In this film, a black police officer is wrongly accused of murder while passing through a small town, and once proven innocent, is asked to help aid in the investigation of said murder himself, alongside the local police chief. It's got a lot of themes that have been redone time and time again, but the performances by the two leads, as well as their chemistry and the story they tell, make this movie a classic that I'm happy I finally got around to seeing for the very first time. I recommend this to anyone who enjoys a good cop movie. Number 9. To Live and Die in LA. Now we jump forward into 1985 with revered director William Friedkin's crime thriller classic To Live and Die in LA. I had heard of this movie title a few times here and there over the years, but I never knew who was in it, who directed it, or what it was all about. So as I said, William Friedkin directed this one, and it stars William Peterson from Michael Mann's Manhunter, as well as Willem Dafoe as our villain, making his second appearance on this list. William Peterson plays a Secret Service agent who is tracking down a counterfeiter when his partner is murdered. Now out for revenge, our protagonist goes over the edge and leaves us to wonder what lines he'll be willing to cross to get his man. Definitely another great crime movie. Number 8. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Our next two entries take us back directly to 2023, and we start with James Gunn's final entry in the Guardians of the Galaxy series, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I've really enjoyed both Guardians movies that came before this one, and although I'm sure we'll be seeing some of these characters again, this was a great ending to Gunn's trilogy about this ragtag team that became a family while hunting down power gems and evil sentient planets in outer space. This is the darkest entry in the Guardians trilogy in my opinion, although all the movies have had little elements of darkness in them, so this didn't feel too out of place. If you enjoyed the other Guardians movies, you're definitely going to enjoy this one because it's still entertaining and it's still a fun ride. Number 7. Killers of the Flower Moon. Still in 2023, we now hear from one of the greatest directors of all time with another entry into his stellar catalog, Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone, I did a short review on this movie already that's available to watch on this channel, so I won't spend too much time talking about it again, other than to say it's definitely one of my favorite movies of 2023, and I'd even go as far as to say it's some of the best that I've ever seen from Martin Scorsese. I don't think it tops some of his other movies, but for this late in his career, I think it's an incredible and tragic piece of art with a worthwhile message at its core. This is an easy one to recommend. Number 6. Rollerball. Back to the 70s we go, and more specifically 1975, for this fantastic James Caan performance in Rollerball. In a future where corporations have replaced countries, humanity gets its entertainment from a brutal and violent sport that harkens back to the days of gladiators, except these guys wear roller skates and sometimes bash each other's heads in with a steel ball. When it's decided that a highly successful rollerball player named Jonathan must retire, this athlete begins to defy his corporate masters as well as the odds in this brutal sports-based, futuristic 1970s classic. This is not the most original story ever, but for its time it was certainly different, especially with the futuristic spin that they put on things and the sport of rollerball itself. This movie looked dangerous to make, but boy was it a fun time, and one of the reasons that for me, 2023 was the year of James Caan. Before we get into our final 5 on this list, I just want to give a shout out to the artist who created the synthwave music in the background, Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. The music is royalty free and copyright free, and there are instructions on the White Bat Audio YouTube page for how you're permitted to use the work. For me, I find that they're great for my videos, but I also love to listen to the music in my leisure as well. Whatever the case, make sure to check out White Bat Audio. The music is fantastic. Number 5, Rolling Thunder. And now for our final entry from the 1970s in a movie that completely took me by surprise. Starring William Devane and Tommy Lee Jones, 1977's Rolling Thunder is just a brutal but awesome revenge movie. It's about a Vietnam War veteran who returns home with all kinds of scars, including ones that you can't see on the surface, like many war veterans sadly tend to. To make things worse, because he was a prisoner of war and presumed dead, his wife had begun a relationship with his best friend back home. When you're wondering what could be worse than that, his wife and son are murdered, and his hand is shoved down a garbage disposal that is turned on. It's brutal and it's tragic, but William Devane gives a great performance as a man with a hook for a hand out for revenge. If you've never seen this one before and you're into revenge movies, definitely check it out. Number 4, Oppenheimer. These movies continue to get more and more difficult to place in any order that I can't help but feel critical of, but like I said, the ranking isn't to be taken seriously, and so here we go. Directed by Christopher Nolan and released in 2023, Oppenheimer was an incredibly sombering but absolutely riveting film that goes through the development of the atomic bomb, focusing on the involvement of the man many people call the father of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer. I've been a long-time fan of Christopher Nolan, and I can say the same for Cillian Murphy, and so it was really great to see him shine in the role of Oppenheimer, playing the haunted genius with a seriousness and depth that will certainly leave a lasting impression on audiences. For historical buffs as well as film buffs, this movie is a must-see. Number 3, The Iron Claw. Now, let me get this out of the way really quickly. I believe Oppenheimer is the better film than The Iron Claw overall. On a technical level, it is a superior film at the very least. However, I rank The Iron Claw one slot higher purely because I'm a huge fan of professional wrestling, and so even though this isn't historically as relevant as Oppenheimer, it was just a hair more interesting to me personally. The film looks at the tragedy of the Von Erich family and their rise and fall in the world of professional wrestling, specifically the father, Fritz, and his sons, Kevin, Carrie, David, and Mike. There's another Von Erich brother who regrettably isn't in the movie, but if you know the story of this tragic family, then you'll perhaps understand why. The movie is overwhelmingly sad, but if you're fortunate enough to have family, this movie will make you appreciate them even more. I definitely recommend this, especially to fans of professional wrestling, but again, it's just really sad. Number 2, Snatch. We go now to the year 2000 once again for the next entry on my list, Guy Ritchie's Snatch. Now, I tried to watch this movie years and years back, I think when I was actually still in high school. However, the thick accents threw me off as I couldn't really understand anyone. Years later, I was finally able to check it out again, and this movie was awesome. It features an ensemble cast including Jason Statham, Brad Pitt, Stephen Graham, Vinnie Jones, Benicio del Toro, Dennis Farina, and Alan Ford. This movie blends comedy and crime as we follow a colorful array of characters who are all trying to track down a stolen diamond that could change their lives. In a way, I'm glad that I couldn't get into this movie when I was younger, because now that I finally did, it was a real treat. I had an absolute blast on this entertaining roller coaster ride of thieving, gambling, boxing, and shooting, all the way up to its climax. This is definitely my favorite Guy Ritchie movie that I've seen, and now I can finally understand what all the love and hype is about regarding that guy. I highly recommend this. Number 1. The Insider. Now for the top entry on this year's list, we ended with a Michael Mann movie, since he probably is my favorite director. I simply love Mann's movies in general, but for years now, 1999's The Insider has been one that has eluded me. I was worried that the movie would bore me, as I wasn't convinced that the subject matter would be up my alley. For example, the IMDb plot description reads as follows. A research chemist comes under personal and professional attack when he decides to appear in a 60 minutes expose on big tobacco. This was a huge news story when it originally broke in real life, and the film goes into detail on the men responsible for breaking the story itself and the sacrifices and hardships they endured in order to do the right thing. A great movie about a whistleblower and the consequences of standing up to injustice, The Insider was my favorite movie that I saw this year. I highly recommend it, not just because it really happened, but because it's a fascinating and expertly told story. Well, that just about concludes my list. I watched around 150 movies in 2023, and it was a real challenge selecting 23 movies from that list. If there's anything here that you didn't see before, I highly recommend it. Once again, as always, thank you so much for stopping by, and thanks for getting lost in video. I'll see you next time.